The following presentation is a gift from the team at Streamline Publishing, publishers of Fine Art Connoisseur, Plein Air Magazine, and weekly newsletters Fine Art Today, Realism Today, Plein Air Today, and American Watercolor, and events, the Plein Air Convention and the Figurative Art Convention. We offer over 400 different art instruction tutorials and ultra high-quality video by the world's leading artists. If you like what you see, help us support our artists and our team with your purchase. Each video aired has a special discount code for today only in the comments section with a link to the video offered. And to see everything we do, or if you want to receive notice of new releases, new products, and new events for artists, simply click the other link, which says, "See everything we do." Thank you.
Hi, I'm Eric Rhodes, publisher of Fine Art Connoisseur and Plein Air Magazine. We got a brand new debut video from the great Kathleen Hudson. I think you're going to like this because it's going to teach you how to paint clouds and how to create that, what we call atmospheric perspective, that sense of distance. I hope you enjoy it.
Hi, I'm Kathleen. Thank you for joining. Today we will be looking at a painting of a mountain storm so that we can see how clouds and atmospheric distance can bring a broad vista landscape to life. The source image I'll be using is from the Rocky Mountain National Park. I was there back in 2016 for Plein Air Rockies, and when I handed in all of my paintings at the end of the event, I drove back into the park and up along Trailbridge Road to get some reference photos since I had neglected to do that earlier in the week. And I was really disappointed because it was forecast a thunderstorm all day. And I was worried I wouldn't end up with great photos to take back home. But it ended up being perfect for creating a drama within the landscape. Instead of postcard-like scenes with the mountain ranges in full sun, I got to see dramatic clouds unfolding over the mountains and dipping into valleys. It told a really different story about the land. Spots of sunlight shone through in some places, and then in others, the rain was so intense that it obscured the line between the sky and the mountains. Atmosphere like this creates variety and movement. And those are both things that make a painting interesting. When you vary your shapes, your angles of composition, your values, your textures, your hard and soft edges, and then infuse your brushstrokes with movement, you can capture that sense of being fully present in a location. You can also help your viewers feel like they can step into the landscape that you found compelling enough to paint. To create dynamic clouds and a sense of distance, you can start by getting outside and observing atmosphere firsthand. You can sketch, you can take photos, take notes, and just watch the drama of a storm unfold in front of you. Every moment you spend learning from nature is something that you will take into future paintings. As you watch this demonstration, I hope you'll see something critical about my painting process. I break painting down into stages. First, I think about design and value. So I'll do a thumbnail sketch and land on what I think is the most compelling version of the painting that I'll come up with. If something looks good in a small scale, then the chances are good that it will scale up and be a really good design in a larger canvas. So then I do take that design once I've finalized it and I scale it up to a larger canvas, and I create a value underpainting by using transparent thinned oil paint in sort of neutral colors. And I get the values almost exactly where I want them. I'll even use a paper towel almost as an eraser to take out highlights. Then I set aside lots of time to mix big piles of paint. And doing that will enable me to create better brushwork during the painting later, because I can really load up my brush and paint freely. It also helps me to test out sections of color on the canvas and see if it looks good. You know, everything with color is relative, so it's about how colors look next to each other in relation. And then the other benefit is that I can see how well everything is harmonizing on the palette. If things look good on the palette, then the chances are good that it will yield a painting that harmonizes well. So when I've mixed these big piles of paint, then I can go and be much freer in the process of laying down my brush strokes and, you know, building up layers and doing interesting things with texture and edges. These early stages of painting may feel really time consuming to you, but the thing is, it will lay a structure for a painting that can be a success. It ultimately, I think, can make your paintings have a fresher look to them when you haven't had to keep correcting things, but instead built upon such a good foundation that you can be confident in the way you lay down your brush strokes. If I do all of this and I can nail those components of you know, getting balance when it comes to my values, my colors, my textures, my edges, all of those things that we think about with every painting. If I can get the right balance of all those things, then I will come up with a painting that I like. And so I hope this will help you in that process too, to find out what method works best for you in helping you create a painting that fulfills your vision. So now let's go into the studio where I'll show you some plein air paintings that I've done, and we'll talk about what was successful and what wasn't. And I hope it'll give you a window into a little bit of my thinking as I'm creating source material in the field. Before I start with the demo, I want to go through and show you some recent paintings I've done, mostly plein air. And I'll talk about each one, what I was trying to achieve in the painting, and I'll share a little bit about the location and how I was approaching the painting itself. So the first one is from the Rockies as well. This one I actually did sitting in the back of a rental car because it was raining off and on, so I wanted to be out of the rain for a little bit, but I saw this, there was a gorgeous sky right over the edge of some mountains in the Moraine Valley. So here, what I was focusing on painting were cloud patterns. And this kind of painting is really fun to do because you get to design it actively yourself. You don't have to replicate exactly the clouds that you see because they're going to change anyway by the time you finish your painting. And one thing that you'll notice in a plein air study like this that you would never get out of a photograph are some of the color temperatures in the clouds. So as clouds, as they get closer to the horizon, the light on the clouds will often get warmer and more red and more yellow too. You'll also notice that the shadows at midday on the clouds get more blue because there's more atmosphere as it approaches the horizon. Whereas the shadows up here get sort of more purple and darker. There's more contrast up near the top. So this was just a little 8x8 demo. So next, this is a painting. This is a painting of Upper Copeland Falls in the Colorado Rockies. This is something I actually have the thumbnail sketch for this one as well. So I'll pull that up for us. Thumbnail sketches are something I always do, even for a quick draw. But with this one, I really wanted to lead the eye in and I wanted to, I noticed now in the studio, if I did another version of this, I would probably change the way this rock looks. It's kind of a big mass, it's a little on the nose. I would want to make it a little bit more subtle so that the area of focus, which is this, the fall right there and the light on it, so that stands out more. The one thing you'll notice when you're painting waterfalls, when you're painting from photographs, they just can't capture what you see in real life. So if you're going to paint waterfalls, you really want to take the time to do plein air studies, because there's so many subtleties in the way that the color temperature affects the falls, the way that you see different whites, and those different whites just don't show up in any kind of photo reference you'll take. Here's another waterfall piece. This one was a little bit more successful in terms of composition. And I think I also have yes, I have the thumbnail sketch for this one too. This is Cumberland Falls. It's only about an hour and a half from where I live in Lexington, Kentucky. I love these falls. There's a viewing platform that I can set up in and paint directly. I painted this one really early in the morning, so I had some interesting shadows on these rocks, and I had one really wonderful thing about early morning light or late evening is that you have warm light, and then it really emphasizes the shifts in color temperature. So the mist that I saw rising from the falls was almost purple. And it contrasted really nicely with kind of this light, warm yellow that you could see in the rest of the foam on the falls. So the next one we'll look at is from La Jolla Cove near San Diego. Painted this during the plein air convention when I was there a couple of months ago. So this one I was really focusing on designing the waves in a way that would lead your eye from the foreground to the background. So this right here is kind of the focal area. I loved the way that there were just these points of really bright turquoise underneath the edge of the wave where the foam would start to curve. And then another thing you'll notice is whenever the water angled up and kind of faced the sky, you would have almost a violet, like kind of a lighter violet or ultramarine color where the sky was reflected on the surface of the water. When I'm painting seascapes and coastal scenes, I'll spend a long time looking at the waves and you just to make sure that I can design them in a way that looks realistic. And so I spent a long time just seeing exactly what the angle was as it came into La Jolla Cove, and whether it was realistic to have some waves crashing back here on these rocks at the same time. And when I saw that happen a few times, I thought, okay, good. My composition doesn't look like it's completely invented. I'll go ahead and look at our last one here, which is this is actually a studio piece of the California coastline. Scoot this off. So this painting is really about this area right here. This is the focal area, and it's about the storm, and you can tell that there's a break in the clouds above the painting. It's not in our point of view here, but there's some light that's just falling in a really concentrated way on the foam that's hitting these rocks. So I wanted to use this foreground wave to lead the eye back into this area. And what I really enjoyed about this painting, not just the colors, I love painting using different blues and turquoise, but I loved getting to do some really creative brush strokes. So if you look more closely in here, I was able to I used some flats and just did a lot of blending, just drawing sections of light into into the rocks to give this impression of, the waves crashing against the rocks, some spray coming up. So that was something that I really enjoyed about doing this piece. I also had a lot of fun playing. In the foreground, you can see, I came in after the fact, and I sort of softened some edges and drew paint up, and that's the fun part about doing foregrounds, is you can get really creative with your textures, and it's a great way to, the value range here in the foreground is not all that pronounced. I didn't want to draw attention to that, but I was able to create some interest there by really varying my texture instead of trying to vary values. If I had varied values more down here, it would have drawn the eye away from this focal point here. That's probably the last one we'll look at. I'll now get into discussing some of the materials that we'll use. Before starting the demo, I'd like to go through some of the materials I use every day in the studio and when I'm outside painting. First is paint. So we'll look at these. These are Michael Harding paints, which I use because they have a wonderful pigment load and a really buttery consistency that works right out of the tube. I found that these paints, the pigment load is so strong that a little bit actually goes a long way, especially with the transparent colors that I tend to favor. So here I have titanium white #1, which is blended with safflower oil. So it's a pretty slow drying white. I like my palette to stay wet as long as possible, so that's something that I think about. This is cadmium yellow lemon, and this is Indian yellow. This isn't a color that everybody has on their palette. I love it because it's a really transparent, kind of warm yellow, and I can use it to mix dark colors, and it doesn't bump the value up like the deeper cadmium colors do. This is cadmium red. I use that interchangeably with cadmium red light. This is magenta. This is a beautiful transparent color from Michael Harding, and it's a pure magenta color, so I use it when I'm, when I need something that doesn't tint brown, sort of like alizarin does. So it's a really rich color. A little of this goes a long way. So I actually, for the first couple of years I was using this color, I had a sample tube, and that got me through quite a few paintings. This is alizarin crimson, which I don't really need now that I use magenta, but I love mixing some darker neutral colors with it. This is transparent red oxide. I use that instead of burnt sienna, which is more opaque. This is sort of my most commonly used warm color. I go through quite a lot of it because I use it for underpaintings and for washes, and it's just a wonderful warm color to have. This is raw umber, which I don't always have on my palette, but it's wonderful for landscapes that have a lot of rocks in them. It's just sort of a shortcut color. I can mix it, but it's handy to have it on my palette. The same goes for these two. This is yellow ochre, which is a wonderful shortcut color, and then neutral gray. Now, I've loved using pre-mixed grays in my work. It saves some time. I can mix these grays, and a lot of people will keep a puddle of their previous day's colors out and kind of have this mud pile going. What I found is that when I do that, I first of all don't end up with quite enough. The color is always a little bit different based on what I was painting the day before, and I find that the value is different. So if I'm relying on that to kind of adjust my values outdoors and indoors, it can get me in trouble. This is Gamblin's solvent-free gel. I really like that this stays wet on the palette for a long time. It also dries with kind of a film. It doesn't dry like glue as liquid does. This right here is phthalo blue, and I love this one. I know it's a bold color and it can get you in trouble, but I use this every time I paint. I like cobalt blue as well. You can't really mix this color. There's something about the cobalt pigment that isn't really, it's not something you can replicate with other blues. So it's wonderful for distant atmosphere. Finally, ultramarine blue from Michael Harding. The Harding ultramarine blue is something that I'm pretty evangelical about. It's a beautiful, pure color that it's brighter than any other brand I found of ultramarine blue. So that's a color that I use all the time. And I'm also really into gamsol for a solvent. It really is odorless, and so you won't notice it if you're using it in the studio heavily, as I tend to do. I've got a palette knife. It's about 1.5 inches long, and I use this for mixing, and then I also use it for texture, especially in the foregrounds of painting. So you'll see me use that today. Another tool that I have before I get to brushes is a shaper tool. This you can pick up from Amazon or from Jerry's, but it's made for clay shaping, but I use it to wipe out some brush strokes if I don't like one. I can also use it to create, to kind of create some interesting shapes in, when I'm painting distant roads or trying to lay in or draw some power lines in a painting. I found that this is the easiest way to do it rather than trying to use a rigger brush over wet paint. So now let's look at some brushes. I use rosemary brushes. I found their quality to be really consistent. These are the first ones. This is kind of a recent discovery for me. They do these goat hair mops called Monday mops. And I had them in a variety of sizes. In the studio, I use them with longer handles, but these are my plein air brushes you'll see today. And so these are great for kind of scrubbing in color when I'm doing an initial wash. And they're also good for softening edges later on in the painting. So they serve kind of a dual purpose. The next brushes, these are my workhorse brushes. I use these most heavily as I'm painting. Here is a classic bristle brush, and it's size 10 flat. So that's good for laying in color. This one is an ivory curved long flat, size 8. And that one, you'll see me using this one for the bulk of the painting today. I love the curved flats because they give some of the benefit of a filbert. It's kind of the best of both, filbert and flat, because you don't have these kind of sharp edges that you would get with a normal flat, but you still have the directness and the quality of a flat brush stroke, which I prefer for landscapes. Here is a size 6 ivory flat. So the ivory series is a synthetic series. So you have a little bit of softness that you don't get with with the classic bristle like this. But they hold their shape really well, unlike a lot of synthetics that you can pick up. Here is an evergreen flat. This one's size 7. And the evergreen are the same as the ivory. The only difference is that they go through a dyeing process that actually softens the brush a little bit. So they're a little less springy than the ivory brushes are. This is an ivory long filbert, size 6. So I use that for clouds and smaller paintings, for anything that needs a little bit of a softer edge than the flat will yield. This is a size 2 long filbert, also the ivory series. And this one is great for doing smaller details in a landscape painting. Here is a size 4 long filbert, and this is the master's choice. So that's a synthetic mongoose that Rosemary makes. And this one it's also great for details. These brushes are really soft, but once you get paint on them, they actually hold an edge, line really, really well. This is a size 10 master's choice flat. And this one is great for softening edges. You'll see me use it today with the foreground especially. Finally, we've got a really fun brush. This is a 1/2 inch ivory dagger. So they have swords which are longer, and then these dagger brushes that have kind of a soft chisel edge to them, and they come up to a point. And they're really fun for doing these almost calligraphic brush strokes. So I love especially using these when I'm doing seascapes and have some really interesting patterns in the water, but I'll probably break it out today as well. So those are my brushes. Go ahead and put these back. One thing you'll notice about the paints that I use is a lot of these are very transparent synthetics. And these have an added bonus for plein air painting, the Indian yellow and the magenta being examples. With these, not only are they really pure and transparent, so you can narrow down your palette using them, but they weigh significantly less than the earth or metal derived colors like cadmiums or a yellow ochre. So yeah, if you go into a paint store and pick up a large tube of Indian yellow and a large tube of one of the cadmium colors or yellow ochre, you'll notice the difference in the weight, which is something I think about when I'm going to be hiking for a long time with the paints. You'll note that I don't have any greens on my palette. This isn't because I'm opposed to premix green. In fact, I use them pretty regularly in the studio. But I found that for my plein air kit, I can use these blues and then these two yellows or yellow ochre to make pretty much any green that I need. So we'll take a look at my panel today. This is actually this is Centurion double oil primed linen, which I use for most purposes. I really like using Braymar's L64 or New Traditions L600. Those are both wonderful sort of smooth, fine weave linens that have an oil priming. For me, oil priming is critical because when I'm doing my initial layer and doing a wash, I love to wipe out highlights. And you can't do that on an acrylic or universal primed canvas because it will soak, it'll suck the pigment right in the minute you lay it down. So oil priming is something that I always look for in a canvas. So the last thing that I always keep in my studio and carry with me plein air is a mirror. So this is my plein air one. It's just a pocket mirror. And I use this frequently when I'm painting to check my painting in reverse. And it's a wonderful thing to be able to do because it's like seeing it for the first time. If you come back to a painting after a couple of days away, you always notice things that you want to do differently. But if you check your painting in real time with a mirror as you're painting it, you'll see a lot of those things the same way that you would after taking a longer break. So it has a real benefit when you're painting, doing a demonstration like this, or if you're in the field and don't have time to take a pause in between painting sessions. At this point, I'll take a look at the reference that I'll be using today for the demo. So here we have a photo. It's going to be a square composition, and it's actually going to have a horizon that's close to the center, which is not something I typically do, but it works just because there's so much movement with this cloud coming down, and then there's a storm. I don't know if you can see it, but there's actually a rain hitting this distant mountain. So I'm going to lighten those mountains in the background to push them back. Another thing I'll do is lighten elements of the foreground and create some interest here. Something you have to be aware of when you're working from a photo is that a photo will always extend the value range of what you're seeing. So in real life, you probably would never see an actual white, like a pure white color. You would always see that there would be elements of gray and of some color in the clouds. And you also wouldn't see black in any way really. But here, I've already actually adjusted the value range of this, and I've lightened some of the shadows and bumped down some of the highlights. And so if you're working with a photo, that's something that you'll want to do. You can edit it digitally and reduce the value range. So that'll just give you a better approximation of what you would have seen if you had been standing there painting plein air. Another thing that I do, I mentioned before, I always do a thumbnail sketch. So here is my thumbnail sketch, and you can actually see that I've changed the composition pretty significantly. So I've here this mountain goes right off to the edge, and so it draws your eye out of the scene, and I didn't want to do that. So I've brought in the edge of this mountain so it's not leading your eye out of the frame of the painting. I'll also put in a road. There's actually a road that runs over this ridge, and you can't see it all that well in the picture, but it was there in real life. What really stood out to me about this reference was the line of trees that you see coming into, that lead your eye right into the background. So I want to emphasize that. You'll notice me as I'm laying in my wash, I'll create some of those lines that lead the eye right back into where this road begins and then into the distance. Another thing that I've done differently in the thumbnail sketch versus the reference is I've bumped this cloud over. So here, a lot of the drama in the cloud happens on the edge of the canvas. But because I've got this dark mountain in shadow right here, I wanted to bring a lot of the drama of the cloud onto this side to sort of balance it and provide a counterweight. So the thumbnail sketch is a great way to sort of experiment. I always use pencil when I'm doing a thumbnail sketch because I love being able to erase and sort of try different things. You can see the light coming in. I've done that by just erasing and creating shapes. All right, so now it's time to start painting. I will scale up this thumbnail sketch, and sometimes when I'm doing something that involves careful drawing or architecture, I do a more detailed grid on the larger surface. This time, because it's all, there aren't a whole lot of buildings or complicated drawing, I'll just do a drawing in paint using sort of a neutral warm color, and I'll just do kind of a basic quadrant grid just to locate some of the bigger masses that I want to lay in for the underpainting. So I'll start by mixing my neutral color, which is going to be ultramarine blue, and then some transparent red oxide. This is just kind of a nice warm neutral if you bend it a little bit more towards the transparent red oxide. And both of these colors are transparent, so I always lay in a wash in transparent colors because that way if I leave some of it showing, it looks brighter. It sort of picks up the light. So I'll start by, I'll grab this larger brush, use plenty of gamsol with it, and I'll actually begin by killing the white. So I'll put this all over the canvas and take it to about an 8 on the value scale, with one being white and 10 being black. Warm it up a little bit. Then I actually spread it around using a paper towel. For my purposes, I really enjoy using the blue shop towels that you can pick up at a hardware store. The Viva paper towels work well too, but the blue shop towels don't leave any kind of fuzz on the canvas. All right, so we've got a basic undertone. Now I'll use the same mix of ultramarine blue and transparent red oxide to do a little bit of underdrawing. If you look closely, you can see that I've done some light pencil over my thumbnail sketch, just right down the center of the canvas in either direction. So I'll do that here too. This is about the middle. It doesn't have to be really exact with this. Just because if I bump the mountain up or down a little bit, or the clouds, it won't change the character of the painting. But you can see the mountain kind of comes up about halfway in this thumbnail sketch, so I'll stay consistent with that, since like I said earlier, I've worked out a lot of my composition right here on the thumbnail sketch. So as I'm doing this, I'm thinking about my lines. I'm trying to keep the lines fluid. I'll come back in and probably wipe out sections or darken it a little bit more as I go. Here's where this is going to be a really fun section of the painting, because the cloud kind of swoops in, so it'll really give the impression of movement and drama in the final piece. This is the shadow on the underside of the cloud. At this stage, it really doesn't look like much, but you're laying in the foundation for the rest of the painting. So it's important to create big, simple shapes that read well from a distance. That's what I'm thinking about as I'm doing this. So this is the shadow side of that cloud. And I'll go in and wipe some of this out to lighten it. And I can use the paper towel to actually draw the highlight on the cloud. So it comes up to the top here. And sort of comes in almost to the center of the canvas below. And there's this fun little tail on the cloud, so I'll go ahead and pull that into the drawing. Our tendency is to create and leave major structure, and you want to have structure at this stage, but as you progress to painting, you want to remember that clouds don't have really hard edges for the most part. So you're always, even if there is kind of a hard basic edge, you'll soften elements of it by bringing little tails out. So I'll go ahead and brighten that even more. This is going to be the lightest point in the painting right here, where this cloud comes out. All right, now I'll draw some of the highlights. I'll bring it over to the top. There's still some sun hitting the top of that cloud right here. Need to get a clean section of paper towel. And here's where the light is hitting the back side of that cloud. All right, so I'll go ahead and keep painting the shadow. that comes in on the underside of the cloud. Sometimes when I am doing my initial wash, I'll go ahead and introduce some color. And I may do that with this one. So far, obviously, I've stuck with my neutral undertone. I'll go ahead and knock this value down a little bit. It's a bit too bright, or a bit too dark, rather. And this is where, in the distance, that storm is coming down over the mountains that recede into the background. So here I'll go ahead and indicate that this mountain is a cooler color. It's in the shade, and it's in the image you can see it looks pretty noticeably blue. So I'll go ahead and indicate that on my underdrawing. So what I'm thinking about now is just getting the values to approximately where I want them in the final painting. So that's going to mean this will be darker. I'll probably lighten elements of the cloud with a paper towel. I'm not thinking about trying to finish any one part of this drawing at once. I'm just laying in big shapes and then going back and kind of correcting as I see things that need to change. I'll get that edge where the sky meets the mountain. I use the paper towel almost as much as I use the brush during this stage of the operation. And that's the benefit of using an oil prime canvas, is you can wipe out you can really wipe out any section of it that you want until it completely dries. Let's get this foreground line in. You can see this is right here where we're going to have some rocks in the foreground. This will be the section that's closest to the viewer from this vantage point. The brush that I'm using is a hog bristle brush, so it can take a fair amount of scrubbing. That's why it's a good one to use for lay-ins. And as I get closer to the foreground, I'm going to go ahead and introduce a little bit more of the warm color, the transparent red oxide, into the shadows. I'm doing this because I'd often, the color temperature will shift as you get closer to something. There's less atmosphere between you and the subject, and so there's less atmosphere, for instance, between me and these rocks or these trees in the foreground and me and the distant mountains. Those are much further away. We're going to see a lot more atmosphere in between. So I definitely consider that when I'm even at this stage where I'm laying in my underpainting. And again, I'm thinking about big, simple shapes. I want a lot of variety in my shapes. So I don't want to have any kind of repetition in terms of angle. So I don't want, say this angle to exactly mimic this one. I'll try to create some difference, because that makes the painting more interesting. So one thing that you can see down here, this is going to be kind of a swooping line, this mountain in the foreground. And something that you may not notice right away, but it's happening sort of behind the scenes, is that it will mimic the swooping line of this cloud in reverse. And it's something that you can see in the reference photo a little bit, but I'm going to emphasize it as I'm creating the drawing for this painting. Again, at this stage, I'm still just using transparent red oxide and ultramarine blue. And I vary the mix a little bit. Here is more transparent red oxide, so it's warmer, and I'm going to use that more as I approach the foreground. Here, as you can see in the reference photo, the mountain is in shadow, it's in the distance, it's more blue, so I cool it down using more of the ultramarine blue on a relative basis. So this, here in the foreground, again, I'm using those two colors, but more steered towards the transparent red oxide. So this is a really interesting line. This, again, is what really drew me to this composition. I love the way that this line of trees comes down in the foreground. So I really want to emphasize that. So I want to make the lines really interesting. When you're creating a composition, you have a bunch of different elements. You have, in your final painting, you'll have everything from shape, line, value, of color, texture, design. And at this point, I'm thinking mostly about, I'm not thinking about texture at all. This is all very thin paint. I'm not thinking about color, I'm thinking about value and design. So the design is what I really want to nail at this stage of the painting. If I have a strong and simple design, the painting is much more likely to be successful. And every painting that I've done that I've really liked has started off with a really strong design and a really simple one. And this isn't the most involved composition, but that's actually better because it means that if somebody is looking at this painting from across a room, it will read well from a distance. And you want a painting to look good even if it's scaled down to postcard or business card size. So I'm noticing a few problems as I'm creating this underpainting. So in this thumbnail sketch, this mountain comes up higher than the edge of this one on this side. And I like that. I want to keep that because it kind of leads the eye up, and then you go out, your eye goes out to this cloud shape. Here, I've actually bumped this up, I'm realizing, so I'm going to knock it back down and maybe even bring this mountain up a little bit using still the transparent red oxide with a little bit more heavy ultramarine blue. Keep scrubbing it in. This brush does take a beating. And right now it looks like it has a pretty hard edge. I'm eventually going to soften it because this mountain's in the distance, so you wouldn't see that edge as being quite as stark. But texture and edges are something that I think a lot more about later in the process. So now I've brought this up a little bit, maybe even a little bit more. Just keep pushing that edge. And now I'm going to knock this down a little bit. So bring this edge back down. You can tell that the paint is actually drying as I'm doing this. That's not a problem because I can always go back in and wipe out until it's completely dry. And I can introduce some more gamsol back into the mix if I need to as well. it is an odorless mineral spirit, and I can use it to thin paint when I'm laying in washes. I tend to use this in the early stages of painting. I don't, I paint thin to thick. So my initial layers of paint are thinned with gamsol, but as I get closer and closer to the finish, I'm not using any medium in my paint. Gamsol is great because it is 100% odorless, and so you don't wind up breathing in anything that's really toxic. You still want to use good ventilation in your studio, but yeah, this is something that I always use at the beginning stages of my work, and it's also good for cleaning brushes. So this is I use it at the beginning and at the end of painting sessions. So here, I'm looking at that line and seeing what I think of it. It's good to step back from your painting periodically and just check on different lines, check on values. I'll go ahead and try to darken my values in the foreground so it looks more like what I want it to come to as I start laying on paint. So I'll keep working this. There's a distant mountain in there that I want to indicate sort of loosely. So I'm still using the same thing, the transparent red oxide and the ultramarine blue. And I'll go ahead and scrub in some more color just to bump down that value in the foreground. So there's going to be a train of rocks that leads your eye into the painting in the foreground, but that'll be one of the later things that I put in. I'm going to stand back, take a look. All right, overall, I like what I'm seeing, so I'm going to keep progressing with just getting the values a little bit more accurate, more similar to the thumbnail sketch. I might actually bump up this ridge in the foreground and create a little bit more of a bowl shape right in here. And again, here I'm using the warmer color because it's near the foreground. There's less atmosphere in between me and those shadows. One thing I'm seeing right here, I've got these sort of fingers of the hillside, exposed grass rather than trees that are coming in, and they're all kind of the same size. So I want to create more variation there. So here I'm noticing it's a little bit more thin. This one has, the trees are coming out and covering more of the grass. So I'm going to go ahead and indicate that. Kind of even pull some of it together to unify the shape. Then I'm going to connect this line a little bit more. And then pull these in. So I don't want these shapes to echo each other too much. I'm going to make sure they're distinct and therefore more interesting. So at this stage, it's just a lot of pushing and pulling, looking at value, looking at design. And after this stage, what we'll start doing is mixing paint. I usually pre-mix a lot of my paint just so I can see what it looks like on my palette and make sure all the colors harmonize well. This is getting kind of close to the big idea. I might indicate a little bit more about these rocks in the foreground just so that I can go ahead and create that design in a way that leads your eye back. So these will be some shadows on the undersides of the rocks. I'll introduce some more of the transparent red oxide, keep it warm. And again, right here, I'm thinking about creating variation in the shapes. I don't want them to be too similar. So our tendency is to create more order and less chaos. So I find myself, if I'm not thinking about creating variation, I tend to do the same thing over and over again. And that's it's a quick way to make your painting look both manufactured, because nature is a lot more organic and doesn't, has chaos and variation. And it's also a quick way to make your painting look less interesting too. So I'll go ahead and that's just a quick indication of where some of the rocks might fall. And any of this is open to change. That's the joy of oil painting. You can go back and totally take sections out or redo them. You can change your design as you're going. The benefit to creating the design ahead of time is that I can lay on my paint with more confidence, knowing that I've got a good underlying design that doesn't need to be changed heavily. All right, so let's look. I'll take a step back and take a look. I'm actually going to take a look in the mirror too, and that will show me if there's anything glaring that I need to change. So looking in the mirror, right off the bat, I noticed that these two shapes are they're too much the same. They're the same size. So what I'll do, in the thumbnail sketch, you can see that the mountain in the background it's a larger shape. So I'll knock this down a little bit. Using that, there's a color shift there. So I'll go ahead and bring that blue color in to indicate that this is the larger shape. There we go. And then let's take a look in the mirror again, see if I notice anything else. What I'm seeing now is that these are too parallel, so I'm going to bring this down even further, and then I can either make this a little higher or a little lower, or do the same with one of these. So I think I'm actually going to bring this in and make it just vary the edge a little bit. So I'll take the paper towel and use that to wipe out a little bit of this ridge. Maybe even a little bit more. So that works a bit better. I'll look at it in the mirror again and take stock of the way the sky looks. I might add a little bit more detail to the drawing. I've just got the basic underlying structure of the sky in, but I can, if you look at here in the thumbnail sketch, I've created, there's some more character in this cloud, so I might go ahead and indicate that. So I've got this, I'll indicate this back. There's a distant mountain that you can see in the thumbnail sketch. I'll go ahead and indicate that and place that on the canvas. This is the one that kind of gets lost with the storm coming in. That's something else that will create interest in your paintings. If you have what's called lost and found, so you don't want all of your edges to be well defined. You want to create some mystery. Let your viewer's eye do some of the work in and piecing the whole landscape together. And it's actually a better reflection of what you do anyway when you're looking at a landscape. Your eye can't focus on everything at once the way a camera can. You focus on sections here and there. So I try to do the same thing when I'm painting. I have areas of detail, but then I try to lose the detail in a lot of other passages. All right, getting closer. So I'm trying to replicate this shadow side of the cloud, and try to. I really like the way it looks in the thumbnail sketch, and so I probably won't change it too much. I'm going to try to make this about as close to the thumbnail sketch as I can. And since this is starting to dry a bit, if I want to wipe out some of the undertone I placed in first, so I'll have to get some gamsol on a brush and re-wet it a little bit before I try to wipe it out with the paper towel. So here, got some gamsol on there, and thanks to the oil priming, it comes right off.
There's nothing like watching a storm travel over the mountains. The rolling clouds and quickly changing light make the dark hills and valleys look as though they're gracefully dancing right along. A stark contrast to the raw sounds of wind and thunder. The shifting shadows will play tricks on your eyes, so you rub them and squint to see what is really happening off in the distance. You notice the atmosphere change in mere seconds, dark and then light and then dark again, and you long to capture this beautiful moment so you'll remember this feeling forever. With this always moving landscape, painting such a scene may seem impossible to you, but don't give up. Artist Kathleen Hudson is going to show you how to accurately capture a beautiful storm in clouds and distance. A video tutorial focusing on painting the light and movement of the landscape as a storm travels through the mountains and valleys.
I really enjoy painting skies just because there's so much freedom in the design components. You can change a brushstroke here and there, and the entire character of a cloud is different.
The demonstration painting is set in the gorgeous Colorado Rockies, and Kathleen shares everything with you, from the special prep work all the way to the final brushstrokes.
These early stages of painting may feel really time-consuming to you, but the thing is, it will lay a structure for a painting that can be a success.
See Kathleen's best techniques for creating movement. You'll want to incorporate this into your own work, so your viewers will see and feel the storm as they're watching in person. Paint right along with Kathleen as she explains and demonstrates each decision and step she goes through to create Storm in the Rockies, a full start-to-finish demonstration painting. Available on DVD and instant video, you'll be in awe of clouds and distance with Kathleen Hudson, and you'll want to add this video to your learning library right away.
That was Kathleen Hudson, and the video is called Painting Clouds and Distance. And you can learn more about the full video at lilyartvideo.com. Remember, we have a very special code, a discount code for you today only in the comments section. Thanks for watching.